It's Bill Whittle's State of the Union Address. Hi, I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle, and this is Bill Whittle Now. And Bill, as we record this on Monday evening, the President is getting ready to deliver his State of the Union Address to a joint session of Congress, to the nation, and to the world. And I was thinking to myself, what a different day tomorrow would be if only Bill Whittle were giving this speech. And so I decided to find out how much different it would be. And I want to ask you some sort of targeted areas, not just sort of broad general things, targeted areas of interest that I have here. And number one is, as you go into this speech, and we're going to pretend, even though it's Bill giving the speech, that you bear the entire burden of the Trump administration on your shoulders as you walk into this Hall of Congress. So
this one's going to be fun.
You're President Trump, okay? So, number one is, just in general terms, Bill, tell me about the tone that you plan to take for this State of the Union address.
Now, this is, just to be clear, this is what I would do, not what I predict the president's going to do.
Correct.
I'd be smiling, I'd be humble, I'd be shaking hands all the way in. I would make an effort to shake hands with people who I knew were my most severe opponents, and I would generally try to maintain, going into the hall, I try to maintain a look of cheerful optimism.
Now, as far as, the president and these State of the Union speeches go all over the map, and I feel like they have to do a laundry list. And certainly in the Constitution, the purpose of the State of the Union, which wasn't explicitly a speech, was that the president would give Congress an update on how things are going. And the federal government is a lot more entangled in everybody's lives, and so there's a lot to talk about. But we're only going to remember a few things from your speech, Mr. President. And so as we're coming out of this, what would you like the American people to be thinking and Congress to be thinking was the real focus of your address?
Well, let me tell you what the first sentence of my address would be. It'd be something along the lines of, distinguished guests, my fellow Americans, your government, your United States government has many functions. Its functions and its duties are to protect the country from foreign invasion, to make sure that the law is equally applied to all of its citizens, to do everything it can to keep justice and order, and so on and so forth and so on. But the one thing that the government should be doing more than anything is something it's not doing, and that's it's not working. And the American people have had enough of us, all of us, of both parties in this chamber, in this Capitol, simply not working. It's not that we're not putting effort into things, it's just that none of our efforts are going in the same direction. So tonight I'd like to start with an olive branch offered not just to our political opponents, but to the entire American people. I'd like to ask their forgiveness for the truly dysfunctional state that this federal government has gotten itself into. And starting tonight, I'd like to talk about ways that we can work together. We do have our differences, and those differences won't go away. But surely the American people deserve better than what they've been getting from all of us for quite a long time now.
Well, Bill, right behind you, over one of your shoulders, the House Speaker, Nancy Pelosi, will be sitting with a cheerful, winsome look on her face during the course of your speech. Mm-hmm. And I guess I wonder what you hope she hears.
I don't know what she hears, and I can't really predict that. But since you mentioned that she would be back there, I think at this point I might turn and say, Madam Speaker, first of all, congratulations on your what would you call that?
Reascendance, yes.
Yes, your reascendance. First of all, congratulations on regaining the speakership. Secondly, I would just like to say that I think that this pettiness that's been going on with both sides has gone far enough, and I'm certainly not only willing but eager to work together in a way that I think the American people deserve. Starting from this point forward, I think we should just be able to agree to shake hands and start with a clean slate and get down to the business of actually running this government rather than the business of doing our level best to destroy credibility in this government.
Now, Bill, of course, only the president has a real opportunity to speak during this address, punctuated frequently by applause, mostly from his own caucus on the Republican side of the chamber. But it's quite likely that the Democrats will be engaged in some sort of unified effort to either sit on their hands or frown or make it clear to the president that they're not grokking what he's laying down.
Sure.
How do you deal with that as you look out from the podium at those stoic faces?
Yeah, I think at that point I would say one measure of how dysfunctional this government has become is to see the reaction of members of the Democratic Party and members of the Republican Party in their trenches, facing off against each other, sitting stone-faced at the idea of us actually working together towards what our common goals are. We have different ideas about how to get there, but our common goals. And I only say this not to indict our fellow American Democrats, but only to say that the level of mistrust and vitriol in the Capitol is unworthy of the name of George Washington, and we owe it to him and to others since then, and especially to the people today of this country, to do an awful lot better job than what we're doing now. So I understand why people wouldn't trust me when they say that. There's a lot of things that are very difficult for me to trust too. This isn't easy for anybody, but we have a higher calling here, and we need to rise to that occasion, and we need to do it now, starting this evening.
So Donald Trump got elected to the presidency in many ways in spite of the Republican Party. He got elected with a lot of votes from people who were sick of politics as usual. How does he avoid coming out of this event, the State of the Union event, and realizing that some people will have seen it by the time they see this video? But as you approach this, Bill, how do you avoid just being the guy who's playing to the gallery, essentially playing to the people that you know will be supportive of you? Because if you do that, don't you just lose that whole mantle of I'm an outsider and I'm sick of the whole game?
The second you become elected, you're not really an outsider anymore. You're the president of the United States, and you have duties and obligations. In terms of convincing people of your sincerity, the only way you can convince people of your sincerity is to be sincere about it. If the whole thing is in your own mind, a political posturing or ploy, it'll come out that way, and you'll make things worse. You'll simply make things worse, because then you'll be asking people to trust you to fix a problem of this incivility, and you will be lying to them, and that will increase the level of distrust. Now, for those people who say that the Democrats are fighting dirty and they've been doing everything they can to block Donald Trump, there's no question that that's true. There's no question that these sort of mutual, tag team matches, which get the sides fired up, and canceled her junket, canceled his speech, back and forth, this kind of thing. There's no question that has an appeal, but it has an appeal because the country's become so divided that we are at war with ourselves, and it would take a person of tremendous, a great leader at this point would be able to speak to this problem with a genuine heartache about it. A great leader who really loved this country would understand that this isn't a question of one side dominating the other side for 4 years, then the other side dominating. That they'd understand that we have the same basic goals. We want people to be happy. We want people to be free, and so on and so forth. And this cooperating and doing better for the American people doesn't mean we surrender. It doesn't mean we just suddenly give up and let progressives have everything that they want. It doesn't mean that at all. It just means that at the very least we restore some decorum and some decency and civility to this process. And if you want to look at it from strictly political point of view, I think it would be a very, very clever thing to say, I am extending the handshake of friendship and peace, and I think this has gone far enough, and will you join me in this? At that point, you've left the Democrats pretty much in a box. They can either agree to join you with this, at which point you would presumably things would get better as things went on, just because it was so much on the record. And if they simply said, no, we're not going to join you, then what does that say? Magnanimity is a strange thing, Scott, and respect also. That kind of respect and that kind of magnanimity has to have a certain humility about it, and you have to have the courage to basically you have to have the courage to step out from behind your trench.
I can see people.
And hang on, and that requires courage. But if you do that, and you maintain your principles, you're not surrendering. You're simply saying it's time for us to stop fighting so much, and let's get back to disagreeing about things in a civil way, getting things done, and having a government the American people can at least look at with some sense of respect again.
I can see some people watching this and saying a couple of things. Number one, that kind of a speech would have been great when you held all the cards, but now it looks like a sign of weakness because you just bollocksed up the midterm elections. And not only that, Nancy Pelosi, at least in the short term, seems to have won the little face-off over the government shutdown and the border wall. And so that's going to appear weak. And not only that, I think some people who might otherwise agree with President Trump, in this case, President Whittle Trump, would look at that and say, no, not one moment of honor or dignity or handshake or smile or kindness. These people are trying to destroy our way of life, and they don't deserve any of that.
I've made my entire living convinced that they are trying to destroy this way of life. I have no doubt about it. In terms of the heart of the progressive agenda, I think there's no question about it. And this is what I'm talking about by magnanimity, and this is what I'm talking about by greatness. By greatness, greatness is the ability to rise above the constraints of the moment in order to accomplish a greater goal. And very few people are willing to do that. Very few people are willing to give up their armor. Very few people are willing to get out of their trench for the exact reasons that you just mentioned. That people would spin this as a sign of weakness, or how dare we, how can we possibly compromise with these people? Well, as I said, and I would say during the speech in some form or another, it's been my life work to oppose this progressive agenda. I think it's terribly destructive for the American people. And I'm not suggesting that we stop that. What I am suggesting is that we start talking to each other and start dealing with each other as fellow Americans rather than as people who have been parachuted into this country from some foreign land. And the reason I can say this with some confidence is when you actually speak to people and you don't mention politics, if you just ask them what they want, you find that 85% of the country wants pretty much the same thing. They don't want to see people dying in the streets. They don't want to see poverty. They don't want to see drug abuse. They don't want to see crime. There are people, in my honest opinion, who create these conditions because it suits them politically. But you can have that discussion without it devolving into a Twitter war or these kind of things. This country deserves better than this. Look, Donald Trump has saved the republic to the degree that if he had not been elected, I do not see how we could have possibly recovered, given how weaponized the government has become. But the ability of a leader to be a great leader is the ability to rise above the petty and to speak for the nation. And Winston Churchill was one of the most beloved and despised people in Great Britain at the time he became prime minister. He was deeply, deeply despised by a large percentage of the population. And Winston Churchill did not speak to conservative Tories when he was speaking, and he didn't give his war speeches by demeaning the Labour Party. Winston Churchill spoke to the English as Englishmen and to the British as British people. And that's what made him a great man, not just an important man. He was able to convince his country that the threat was so severe that it is no longer time for party politics. It's time for something bigger than that. And I suspect that that's certainly the case in this country. And I furthermore think that if this were done with strength, this is important, strength of character and strength of purpose, and at the same time of the fundamental humility and self-confidence to be the first person to extend your hand, then I think it would go over very well.
Ladies and gentlemen, Bill Whittle Now is brought to you 5 days a week. We talk breaking news, but we bring it from a position of principle, and we appreciate those people who have made it possible. Those are the members at BillWhittle.com. They contribute anywhere from about $10 to about $50 a month to make this enterprise happen, to foster these kinds of conversations, to distribute these messages around the world. If you'd like to join that citizen producer team, just go to BillWhittle.com and click that Become a Member link. We'd love to have you as part of the crew. So for Bill Whittle, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making this possible.